Welcome, everyone. My name is Yandy Reynoso, and I am one of the advisors at Education USA in Mexico City. Before we start, we suggest you to please keep your cameras and your microphones off. You are welcome to send your questions to the user Q&A on the chat, and we will have some time at the end to review those questions. Also, please be aware that at the bottom of your screen, you have the live transcript button that you can activate that if you want to read closed captioning. So that is available for you. Our topic for today, as you see on screen, is medicine and health fields in the United States. And today, our guest, Megan, from Creighton University. She will be talking about us regarding this topic and also sharing important information about this important area of study that I know all of you are interested in learning a little bit more about, since it's a topic that is very different to what we are used to here in Mexico. So before I give the time to Megan, I would like to just talk a little bit about what Education USA is. So Education USA is US State Department network of advising centers around the world. We have about representation in about 175 countries and territories. Our network promotes US higher educations to students around the world by offering accurate, comprehensive, and current information about the different opportunities available to study at accredited institutions in the US. All of our services and activities, such as workshops, webinars, personalized sessions, are free of charge. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about our services and also our activities, we recommend you to please visit our official website, educationusa.state.gov. And also, whether you plan to pursue a short-term or full degree program in the US, Education USA has different resources you need in your 5 steps to US study. And you can learn more about these 5 steps at our official website. And now I would like to briefly introduce Megan, our guest speaker. She is a representative from Creighton University, and she's also the director of international enrollment at this institution that is located in Omaha, Nebraska. At the end of the presentation, you will also have the opportunity to learn a little bit more about this institution. Thank you so much, Megan, for being here today, and the time is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so excited to chat with all of you today to learn more about studying medicine, but also other opportunities in healthcare in the US, because as she just said, it's so different in the US than it is in Mexico. So with that, let's dive in, because I know this is a huge topic, but there's kind of a lot to think about. So on this first slide, this is what happens sometimes when you go to Google. And maybe you've done this where you've typed in studying healthcare in the US or medicine in the US, and you're going to get all of these terms that come up. And it's one of those times where you think, oh, I've spent about 5 minutes on Google, but you really fell into that 2-hour black hole of Google where, you've just lost so much of your time and you're so confused and you don't know what to do and you don't know what these mean. It's okay. We're going to sort this out a little bit. So first, I'm going to talk to you about what some of those traditional pathways look like. So on this next slide, you'll see that the traditional pathways that we talk about, which are the most popular pathways, are going to be medicine, dentistry, and pharmacy, with, of course, medicine being the #1 program that I'm probably asked about. In the US, this is going to be a two-part process where first you're going to do that pre-healthcare track plus your major or subject. You'll take an entrance exam and then you'll go on to professional school afterwards. So this means that first you'll do your bachelor's degree. Let's think about medicine. So maybe you're going to study biology or biochemistry. You'll do the pre-medicine track. Then you'll take the MCAT, the medical admissions test, and then you'll go to medical school after that. So this entire process is going to be 6 to 8 years in the US, depending on the program and the university you go to. And then after that, you'll have to do what's called residency, which is a word that maybe you've heard about before. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this later on in depth, but residency is basically the on-the-job training part of it. So one common question that I'm asked is, what does the pre-healthcare track include? What is pre-medicine exactly, or pre-dentistry, or pre-pharmacy? So this is going to be the set of courses, the prerequisite set of courses that the professional program requires that you take and that you do well in during your bachelor's degree. So most commonly, you're looking at usually 2 years of biology with labs, 2 years of chemistry with labs, up to a certain level of math, social sciences like sociology and psychology, English composition. Sometimes they might ask for physics. It'll depend on each program, but no matter what university you go to, you will be required to take these prerequisite courses. And then of course, you're going to have to do those extracurricular activities. You probably hear about these all the time already. Nothing changes when you go to university in the US. You're still going to have to do those extracurricular activities. They'll be looking for those internships, research, volunteering, job shadowing. We'll dive in a little bit deeper later into the session about what that exactly looks like. So on the next slide, there's going to be some similar programs. It's a similar pathway, but kind of some less common programs that are asked about. So this would be physical therapy or physiotherapy, occupational therapy, physician's assistant, and rehabilitation sciences. It's a similar process to those professional schools where you're going to do your bachelor's degree first and then go to professional school after. But a lot of times these programs are less amount of time. They don't have a residency requirement. So it means that you're able to begin in the field much faster than some of those traditional programs. However, there are some challenges with these programs. So you do have to start thinking ahead about what exactly is it that you want to do. And where do you want to be? So for example, some of these fields do not exist as robustly outside of the US. So physician's assistant, this would be a good example of that. Physician's assistants are a huge in-demand growing program in the US and a growing job. It's a very similar job to being a doctor. The difference is some of the roles that you could do as a doctor, as well as the level of medication that you could prescribe. However, while it's a great job in the US, this degree does not really translate outside of the US. So if you're planning to stay in the US long term, could be a great option. However, if you are thinking of returning home to Mexico, it may not be a thing in Mexico. You may not be able to get a job with that degree in Mexico. The degree level may be different from country to country. So once again, you have to think long-term about where you want to be. So an example of this is physical therapy and rehabilitation sciences. In the US, to be a physical therapist, you have to do the full 3-year doctoral level program. However, in some countries, you only have to do the 2-year master's program, which would be the rehabilitation sciences. So once again, you have to think long-term about where you want to be and which program would fit best. And then many programs don't accept international students yet. A part of this is because the accrediting bodies for these programs require that these programs be in existence for 5 years before they're allowed to accept international students. So today, if you were to look up a list of which programs, physician's assistant programs would accept international students, you would see that my university, Creighton, is not on that list. However, if you were to look up that list again in 3 years, Creighton would be on that list. And that's because our physician's assistant program is new. In a couple of years, when we reach that 5-year mark, then we would be able to accept students. So it is one of those things where I tell students, if you start Googling programs that accept international students, take it with a little bit of grain of salt because it could change in the next couple of years. On the next slide, You'll see a list of so many different opportunities though in healthcare. I talk to so many students who come to me and say, I want to work in healthcare. I have to be a doctor. And I say, well, do you have to be a doctor? There's so many amazing fields in the US. Being a doctor is not the only pathway to having an awesome job in medicine in the healthcare field. So many of the jobs on the screen right now are in demand. They are high paying. And they are great jobs. And they're becoming more and more popular as these programs grow, as healthcare continues to change. And I honestly think that's one of the coolest things about healthcare is that it is always changing and there is always something new happening. So, for example, right now, one of the most in demand jobs in the US is nurses. Nurses are very highly paid positions. You only have to have a bachelor's degree in nursing to work as a nurse. Definitely a great opportunity. Public health. This has become incredibly popular and incredibly important because of the pandemic, when the US, as well as many other countries, realized that there weren't enough people who could bridge healthcare with the general public and making sure that people understood the importance of vaccines and wearing masks and where to get vaccinated and how to get vaccinated. And really being that education piece, as well as the really grassroots on the ground movement piece. Jobs such as neuroscience or biomedical engineering, always changing, always adapting, always something new to explore in those fields. And then, of course, programs such as mental health therapists and anything having to do with any sort of psychology and mental health is definitely in demand now, post-pandemic. This next slide, though, explores such a cool area that doesn't get talked about enough, and that is the crossroads between healthcare and business. I have a lot of students who will come to me and say, well, I want to study healthcare, but my parents want me to study business, or vice versa. I want to study business, but my parents want me to be in healthcare. You can do both. You don't have to pick one or the other. There's a lot of great pathways here. One very important growing pathway in the US is healthcare leadership or health administration, sometimes called healthcare administration. Every university will call these a little bit different. But this is really an in-demand job where a lot of hospitals and healthcare systems in the US, because so many are privately owned and not owned necessarily by the government, need people who understand how to run a hospital. It's not an easy thing to do, right? You have to make sure that you are maximizing patient care, that you're supporting doctors and nurses and staff, that you're dealing with insurance companies, that you're dealing with the government, and that you're helping it to make sure that the hospital and healthcare system makes money because it is a business. It takes a certain type of person to understand all of those moving pieces in a high level of expertise. So if you are somebody who likes, the intricacies of the healthcare system, knowing that every day is going to be very different and juggling all these moving pieces, that could definitely be a great field for you to go into. Like every field in the world, healthcare data analysts, health information systems, anything doing with data and technology is going to be a growing field. The number of healthcare startups in the US, if you're thinking about, maybe you love computer science, but you also love healthcare, and you love solving problems. So many incredible startups to look at in the US, especially if you love coding or maybe app building, things like that. And it's not going to change. And that's because there's a lot of holes in the healthcare system in the US. And so these startups and the tech companies are really trying to help fill those holes and bridge that education. And then science entrepreneurship, healthcare marketing, pharmaceutical sales. A lot of people commonly think that these types of roles are only, the person who works for a pharmaceutical company who goes to a doctor's office and tries to sell them medication. That is one role in this type of field, but it's not the only role. For example, I have a very good friend who works in medical entrepreneurship. So she actually works for the company that invented the surgical robot. And her job is, as they continue to advance the surgical robot and come up with new techniques, she is trained on it. And then she actually goes to the hospitals and trains the surgeons on how to use it. And then she'll sit in surgery with them and make sure that they're doing it correctly, that they don't have any questions, that the outcome is positive. So it's a great way to be really hands-on in the field, but not necessarily directly do patient care. So the point that I'm really getting at is that there's so many jobs out there like this that exist that maybe you haven't thought about or maybe you haven't considered, and that's okay. One of the beautiful things about the US education system is that you don't have to know what these jobs are. You don't have to know exactly what you want to go into. You have the flexibility when you come to the US to explore all these different roles and explore these different pathways. You just have to start thinking a little bit beyond, I want to work in healthcare, therefore I have to be a doctor, because there's literally thousands of different career paths that exist in healthcare. So on the next slide, one common question that I'm asked, especially when it comes to the medical school pathway, is, well, it's a long process in the US. It's also an expensive process in the US. What if I do my bachelor's degree in medicine in my home country? Can I come do my residency or my on-the-job training in the US? The answer is yes, but, and there is a kind of a big but here. So first, of course, you could absolutely do your bachelor's in medicine in Mexico and come and do many different master's and PhD opportunities in the US. You could go into research, public health, education, anything like that. And this is a popular option. But you could also go into the residency route. So what you would do is you would have to complete what's called the STEP exams or the USMLE in Mexico prior to coming to the US. So it's a series of 3 exams. You take them over several months. They show your knowledge of medicine, different processes, systems, clinicals, things like that. The cost to take these exams is about $2,600 US. These are the same exact exams that medical students in the US take. If you pass those exams, that is when you can apply for residency programs in the US. So as I mentioned earlier, residency is the on-the-job training. It can be 3 to 8 years, depends on your field. So for example, if you're thinking about being a general family practitioner, that may be closer to 3 years. But if you're thinking about being a surgeon, that's going to be closer to 8 years. Residency placement is highly, highly competitive for all students. If you are not placed into a residency, most students will find a research position or go into, a PhD program, something like that. You only have 2 years once you complete your bachelor's degree and pass the STEP exams to get placed into a residency program before those exams basically become invalid. One of the trickiest things right now, though, about applying for residency is that there are more medical school students graduating in the US than there are residency spots available. So, as I said, residency is highly, highly competitive. So you do have to not only do well on your STEP exams, but you have to be very, very good in those interviews and that interview process to get a residency seat. So once you do your residency, then what happens? So as I said, it's the on-the-job training. You are paid for your residency. You're not paid very well on average. Residents make about $50,000 US. So it's okay. It's enough to live on. You're not going to be driving a BMW or a Mercedes quite yet, but you can get by in most cities in the US. Once you complete your residency, if you want to specialize in your field, you may have to complete a fellowship. So for example, maybe you want to be a neurosurgeon. So you just completed your 8 or 9 year residency. Well, maybe you've decided you want to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. Then you're going to have to do the pediatric fellowship with it, which could be another 2 or 3 years. But once again, kind of the beauty of the US system is you have that time and flexibility to figure out exactly what it is that you want to do. So one of the other common questions that I'm typically asked is, what do you do now as a student? Maybe you're in high school and you're trying to decide, do you want to go into healthcare? What kind of pathway do you want to do in healthcare? This next slide will show you some ideas of things that you could be doing right now to kind of explore this field. So of course, one big thing you could do is job shadowing. It definitely helps you explore some different roles and some different careers. This is one thing that I did when I was in high school. So a little bit about myself. When I was growing up, I had 3 career options that my dad gave me. So I could either be a doctor, I could be a lawyer, or I could be an engineer. So I always thought I wanted to be a doctor. I knew I wanted a job where I could help people and support people. So doctor seemed like a great fit. So when I was in high school, I had a great teacher who set me up with some job shadowing experiences. So for a couple months, I got to job shadow a general family physician once a week for about a half a day. It was great. I saw some really cool things, learned some really interesting things. Had a great time. Then I job shadowed a radiologist. And I'll apologize in advance if any of your parents are radiologists or is anybody in your family anything like this. But I spent 8 hours and it was not what I thought it was going to be. And it was actually one of the most boring things that I did. So I thought it was going to be so much fun. I was going to learn to read an MRI, maybe learn to read a CAT scan, see some cool broken bones on the x-rays. No, none of that. We sat in his office, which was about the size of a closet. Of course, we're sitting in the dark because that's how you read x-rays. It happened to be influenza season in the US. So every single x-ray that we looked at was a chest x-ray, and we were looking to see if somebody had the influenza or if they had a pneumonia. I am not going to tell you how many years ago this was, but I could probably still today look at a chest x-ray and tell you if somebody has the influenza or pneumonia. That is all I did for 8 hours. It was very boring, but it was a great way for me to realize being a radiologist was not what I was going to do. So I'm very, very thankful for those opportunities that I have. And I know in the pandemic, of course, in the last couple of years, job shadowing was not an option. But now as we continue to come out of it, hopefully you can maybe start doing some job shadowing. But one thing that you can also consider doing is using your networks, such as your parents, your teachers, Education USA, to see if you can set up interviews with people who work in healthcare. And you could ask them questions like, what is your favorite part of your job? What's your least favorite part of your job? What's something you do every day in your job that you had no idea was even part of your job? And that is also a great way for you to kind of do that job shadowing without having to physically go somewhere. Similarly, internships where you're going to get that hands-on professional experience. Some hospitals do hire student interns or some doctors do. It could be an option, especially if you are doing, your bachelor's degree right now. Definitely considering internships is going to help you prepare for graduate school. Volunteering is going to be big, both for applying for your bachelor's degree or applying for a professional degree or graduate degree as well. It's going to be something that admissions people are going to expect to see on your applications. And then that test preparation is going to be very important. No matter what level you're applying for, you're likely going to have to take an English language proficiency exam, which would be the TOEFL, IELTS, or Duolingo are the most 3 popular options. TOEFL and IELTS, you definitely have to plan ahead for and get a seat in a testing center. Duolingo is nice because it's the least expensive option. You can take it from home. I think over 1,200 universities in the US accept it. Definitely a great option. If you are looking to apply for your undergraduate studies, you may have to take the SAT or ACT. This really depends on university. Many universities right now are test optional, which means if you take it, you have the option to submit your scores, or you could decide you don't want to take it, and that's fine as well. And then if you're thinking about those graduate and professional programs, you'll have to look at exams. Probably the most common ones that you've heard of are going to be the GRE or the GMAT. But then if you're looking at medical school, that would be the MCAT, pharmacy would be the PCAT, and dentistry would be the DAT. And then, of course, the number one thing on this slide, the number one thing that you are doing right now as we talk is researching universities and the opportunities on their campus to support your goals. It can get very, very confusing and very tricky when you're looking at universities in the US. First, there's over 3,000 of us, so you have to start thinking about what are important things to you in the search. But one of the tricky things you're going to find is that, especially if you're in high school right now and you're looking for undergraduate programs, and if you're thinking about these health sciences, almost every university in the US is going to tell you that they have a pre-medicine or pre-dentistry or pre-pharmacy program. And that's because almost every university in the US has those prerequisite courses. But just because they have those courses does not mean that they are going to be the best option for you. You really need to dig into people like me, admissions representatives, and ask us some tough questions such as, what is the rate of your international students in particular getting into medical school or dental or pharmacy school? How do you support your international students in this process? What kinds of opportunities do you have on your campus for students to prepare for maybe the MCAT, the PCAT, or the DAT? It is very, very difficult for international students to get into a lot of these professional programs. So you really want to make sure that a university is specifically set up to support international students because the process is very tricky. So definitely make sure that you're asking tough questions. If you get answers from universities that are very basic answers or very broad answers, that may be a sign that may not be the best university for you. That said, if you do put in the time and the work, you are going to find a lot of great options. And of course, as we talked about at the beginning, definitely lean on Education USA because they know a lot of different institutions and they have contact with a lot of people like me at universities where they can really help put you in contact with the right people. So with that, I do want to chat about my university briefly, and then we do have some time for Q&A. I see some great questions that are popping up. So Creighton University, we are located in Omaha, Nebraska. So we are right in the middle of the US. We are a mid-sized private Jesuit Catholic university. So that means that we are a university about 9,000 students. Half of our students are undergraduate students and half are graduate and professional students. Our students come from all 50 states and about 50 countries around the world. We were actually started as a science and medical university almost 150 years ago. So this is part of why I talk about healthcare so much. It's one of the things that we're most popular for. So we do have a lot of different programs in healthcare, and on the next slide, it lists some of them. At the undergraduate level, you would be in one of three colleges, the College of Arts and Sciences, which is our largest college. This is where a lot of our pre-medicine, pre-dentistry, pre-pharmacy students or students going into research would be. We have our Heider College of Business. So maybe you're thinking about that business and healthcare option. We have a lot of students in our College of Business who go that pathway. And then we have our College of Nursing. So if you're maybe thinking about becoming a nurse, it's a great area for you as well. Then on the graduate level, we do have medicine, dentistry, pharmacy, physical therapy, occupational therapy, physician's assistant, graduate nursing programs, health administration, medical physics, biomedical sciences, pharmacology, pharmaceutical sciences, so many different options in a lot of those healthcare graduate and professional programs, which is awesome. We actually have a lot of students who will come to us for their bachelor's degree and then stay with us for their professional school, especially in medicine. So one of the things that we are special for is that our medical school is one of the few in the US that accepts international students, with the caveat that you do have to complete your bachelor's degree with us. So it's very common already for US students, US citizens, to complete their bachelor's degree with us, then stay with us for medical school, but it's equally as an opportunity for international students, which is awesome. We are also the only university in the US that has two medical schools. So we have one on our home campus in Omaha, Nebraska, and we actually have one in Phoenix, Arizona. And in Phoenix, we also have a second nursing program, as well as we will soon have physical therapy and occupational therapy there. So it's great to know that if you come to us for your bachelor's degree, or if you're looking at professional programs, we actually may have a couple of different options for you, which is pretty cool. So on the next slide, I do want to talk a little bit about Omaha. A lot of parents love to ask me, why Omaha? What's in Omaha? We've never heard of Omaha. You know, we always think about cities on the coasts, on the East Coast or West Coast. Why the middle of the country? So I will tell you, I have lived in Omaha now for almost 6 years, and I actually really love it here. So a cool fact is that we are the top city in the world for Fortune 500 companies. So as I was talking about a lot of those tech companies and those startups, so many opportunities here. We also are one of the top cities in this region of the country for hospitals. We are the only biohazard containment unit in this part of the country, which was very important during the pandemic. But one of my all-time favorite facts about Omaha is that we are the #2 foodie city in the US. So if you like food, this is a great place to be. Almost any type of food in the world you want, you can get. A lot of people from Mexico say, but do you have real Mexican food? Like something beyond Taco Bell or Del Taco? Absolutely. We have true, real Mexican food here, which is wonderful. It was great for me during the pandemic because I typically traveled a lot before the pandemic. And so I missed food from around the world. So it was great that no matter what I was craving, I could easily get it here. But as you can see, we just have a lot going on. We are the top city for college grads to get jobs, one of the top cities for millennials to get jobs. But the really cool thing about this fact is that it means that all of the concerts and the festivals, the farmers markets, and everything that happens in the city, it's really geared towards people in their 20s and 30s. So it is a great place for you to be a college student and be able to do things off of campus and have a lot of fun. And we are a very, very safe place to be as well. So on this last slide, before we break into Q&A, this is my contact information. I will pop it in the chat box as well. But any questions you have, it could be about my university, it could be about the US or healthcare. You could always shoot me an email. I'm always happy to chat with you more after this session. And of course, I can't say it enough. If you are looking for somebody within the country to chat with as well, go to your local Education USA office. Those advisors are amazing. They are there to support you with free information. They can absolutely help you get connected to a lot of universities in the US. So I think with that, we will turn it over to Q&A.
Hi, Megan. Thank you so much for sharing this pretty important information. It's always great to have you with us and providing all this information. We got some questions on the chat that you already shared that you had seen, but there are others that were directed to me. So I'm going to go in that order as I was getting them. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and start with the first one that says, do you know about the BS and MD program?
So for, if you're looking at the BS and MD, so this could be a little tricky. So first, most BS MD programs are going to be for US citizens only. So that's the first thing you have to look for. Do they accept international students? If the answer is yes, then it could be a program that you might want to consider. Some of the tricky things though about these programs is that you're put on a very specific pathway. So if you get 2 years into this pathway and you decide maybe being a doctor isn't the right thing for you, it becomes a little tricky to explore other pathways and kind of figure out, how to move into a different pathway. So it's not necessarily the thing that I will tell students to look for. I say really thinking about that traditional bachelor's degree separate from the MD. So that way you really have that time and opportunity to explore all of the different opportunities in healthcare. And if you decide that medicine is the pathway you want to be on, awesome. But if you decide that maybe physical therapy is where you want to be, it makes it very easy to change at that time. And you generally don't lose any coursework, very easy to switch tracks. So just something to keep in mind with those.
Awesome, thank you. And I think you kind of answered the following one that is like, do you need an American nationality to study medicine? And I think here, if you could talk more about what's the difference between international students and students from the US who study medicine.
Yeah. So the biggest difference is that there are only a few medical schools in the US. It's about 40 that accept international students into medical school. So it is very limited, the schools that you can apply to for medical school. And then with some of those schools, they also will only accept 1 or 2 medical or international students. So It is very, very tough. It's very competitive. Is it possible? Yes, but you definitely have to plan ahead. You really have to know that where you're doing your bachelor's degree is going to be very supportive of this process and really help you along the way. Because you want to know that you're going to be set up for success for when you go apply to medical school.
Awesome. Are there other health fields such as genetic counseling, AS or BS programs that you could talk about?
Oh, absolutely. So as I said on that one slide where I listed a bunch of popular career options, the coolest thing about healthcare is that it's always changing and there are always new and amazing opportunities out there. Genetic counseling, absolutely. It is sometimes one of the things you do have to think about, though, is genetic counseling is actually a great example of this. When you are looking at bachelor's degrees in the US, you're probably not going to find one in genetic counseling. You may need to look for a university that has a great like biochemistry program where you could do research in genetic counseling. So you'll want to look at faculty members' profiles and see what kind of research they're into. Because then you could probably do a master's or PhD program in genetic counseling where the programs get a lot more specific versus on the bachelor's degree level where they're a lot more of a generic name.
And the next one, I think it's a great question, this one as well. What would you recommend to study if you want to work in the healthcare leadership?
Oh my gosh, okay. So the cool thing is you can kind of study anything. You can find specific majors in healthcare leadership or health administration on the bachelor's degree level, but you could also study any business program you want. You could study computer science, data science, biology, biochemistry. It is such a flexible field and flexible program that you really could do almost any bachelor's degree and then do a master's in health administration or healthcare leadership and go into that field.
Oh, there you go. Thank you, Megan. That's a great advice. And what if I want to study an MS medical physics? I know there is a path, but how is for international students?
Yeah, there absolutely is a path for international students. We have a program at my university for medical physics. The cool thing about a lot of these types of programs is that in the US, you'll find that a lot of them are funded programs, which means that you have to trade off working in a lab and doing research, but you get free tuition. So there's a trade-off, but free tuition is great, especially if you also get a stipend on top of that for like your living costs.
Awesome. There are a lot of questions coming, Megan. Thank you for staying with us. How about the postgrad opportunities for an MS in clinical nutrition?
Yeah, so we're actually starting to see a lot more of these types of programs in allied health, such as clinical nutrition, or things to do with like really understanding your total wellness. Whereas people are starting to look at your wellness and well-being as a part of healthcare. And what are you doing in your everyday? Are you walking enough, standing enough? What are you eating? What are you, doing? So we are starting to see a lot more of these types of both bachelor's and master's degree programs that exactly that, like a master's in clinical nutrition. You'll start to see more and more of these coming up.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And there is a question about the English test options. I'm going to take that one. Cambridge is accepted in the US, but it depends. Megan was shared great examples of what tests you can take. And you always need to check with the university where you're applying because not everyone accepts each one of those tests. So always check what the admissions office is saying and then base the test that you decide to take on that, on the university requirements. What are some of the most popular options to finance a master's degree in medical physics and as an international student?
Find a funded program. So many of these master's and PhD programs in sciences will have funding options. So that's going to be the most popular way to do it. And a lot of times it'll be a combination of free tuition plus a living stipend. But like I said, it generally means you have to do some lab work. But it's a pretty good trade-off.
There you go. Is the same pathway for dental residents and for medical residencies?
It's a little bit different. I think you have to do a certain number of clinical hours, but I think some of the hours that you do during your dental school count towards those clinical hours.
Thank you, Megan. Do you know if a master's in mental health is similar to a normal master for international students?
So it can be. It depends on what kind of mental health you want to go into. There's a lot of different master's programs that come under kind of the mental health, psychology kind of realm. So it really just depends specifically on what you want to do. Like if you want to do more school counseling where you work with, middle school or high school students, then you would look for a specific MS in school psychology or school counseling versus more of a general program, which might be more of that clinical psychology. This does take a little bit more research. It takes a lot of introspective thought as well of, what specifically do you want to do in that field, but then really talking to universities about specifically what their students are doing when they finish those programs. And I think one of the tricky things about the US as well is that there's not a standard set of names for different programs. So one university might call it one name, while a different university might call the same program by a different name. So it does take some time and research to really dig into those types of programs.
Awesome. Nutrition, dietetics programs considered part of health fields?
Absolutely.
I have a funny one. They are asking about veterinarian. And do you know if this is similar to the path of
it is, yes. So it's still that two-step process. You'll do that pre-veterinary track with your major. Most students will do biology, animal sciences, biochemistry, something like that. And then you'll go on to veterinary school afterwards.
Awesome. Would you recommend biology or neuroscience before med school?
Depends. The cool thing is about medical schools, they actually don't really care what major you pick. You could pick anything. You could be a history major. You could be a dance major. You could study business. The most important thing is that you do well in whatever you study and that you also do well in those prerequisite courses. So honestly, if you love neuroscience, do neuroscience. If you love biology, do biology. If you love both, you can double major. It's really cool to have that flexibility.
There are a lot of questions on scholarships, Megan. So I think if we just talk as in general, the difference between these scholarships, I think that would be great.
Yes. Okay. So a kind of a big general overview of scholarships. So at a lot of universities in the US for the bachelor's degree, you will find a lot of merit-based scholarships. So these are going to generally be based on like your grades and your test scores. This is the most common source of funding for undergraduate studies. After that, some universities may offer financial aid, and this is where they look at your family financial information. However, for an international student, only about 10 to 15% of universities in the US offer financial aid. So you're really going to be looking at those scholarships. That's really going to be the number one thing. Most of these scholarships are going to be partial scholarships. This full funding, full ride thing is not maybe 1 out of 1,000 students or 2,000 students maybe gets a full ride. Do not count on a full ride or a full scholarship. You're going to be really looking for those partial scholarships. When it comes to graduate and professional school, medical school has no scholarships. It is very expensive, and this is the same for US citizens. Because medical school is so competitive, they don't need to offer scholarships. However, some dental schools, pharmacy schools, physical therapy, occupational therapy, they may offer scholarships for both US citizens and international students. And then for other graduate programs, some of those master's and PhD programs, especially in the sciences, you'll find a lot of funding opportunities that we talked about, those graduate assistantships, and you'll definitely want to look for some of those.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, you need to start doing your research. You want to find those amazing opportunities, but start now. That would be your recommendation. Could you talk in general also like about the difference in enrollments from international students to students from the US in these programs?
Yeah, so on the bachelor's degree, you'll find that international students can enroll in pretty much the same thing that US students can enroll in. The one exception is there are some nursing programs that will only accept US citizens, but many of them will accept both international students and US citizens. So the bachelor's degree level, you'll find that it's pretty unlimited, not a lot of obstacles. But when it comes to some of these graduate and professional programs, like I said, medical school becomes it's already incredibly competitive for everybody, but it's much more competitive for international students just because there's fewer schools that you can consider than US citizens. For some of these other programs like pharmacy, dentistry, physical therapy, occupational therapy, they're still a little bit competitive, but not nearly as competitive as medical school. And most of them are going to be open to international students. There's not that same limitation as medical school. So depending on the pathway you're thinking about, there could be a lot easier pathways out there than medical school.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And those who are asking about any help for high school students or students who are doing a bachelor's already to get in these programs, as Megan was sharing as well, you can get close to your closest advising Education USA Center, and we'll have more information to you, and we can help you to find the options that you may have to study in the US. So I will be sharing our contact information as well here in the chat in a bit. But yeah, just find your closest advising center. If you are here in this meeting and you're from Mexico City, Yandy, who was doing the introduction, is one of the advisors there. And myself, I'm in Merida, Yucatán, Quintana Roo, and Campeche, and you'll find an advising center close to where you live. So just reach out to us and we'll be more than happy to help as well. And Megan, thank you so much for answering all of these questions.
Yeah,
I know there are a lot.
of course.
And I'm gonna close with this one before we say bye to everybody. Or Yandy, do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay, just to I think that I already read this one, so we're good with questions. I just want to say a huge thank you to Megan for this amazing session and for answering all of these questions. As I was sharing, Education USA Mexico City, you can continue talking to us through this email. It's mexicocity@educationusa.org with Yandy. And right now we have a new advisor there as well, that is Magali, so you can get in touch with any of them. And then in Merida, my name is Jenny Diaz, and this is my email, also feel free to reach out. And if you are in any other state, you can always send us an email. I will direct you to your advising center. Thank you so much, Megan, for this amazing presentation. And I don't know if you want to add something else before we end.
No, it's just such a pleasure to chat with everybody and to see so many people log in today. I put my email address in the chat box, so definitely reach out to me. Always, always, always happy to help you guys.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you for being here tonight. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Megan.